Thomas never intended to become obsessed with old transit lines. He was simply an underemployed historian living in Graymont, a city layered with decades of industrial expansions and subsequent abandonments. Like many others, he'd grown up hearing stray rumors about lost stations or sidetracks deep beneath the city's modern subway. Still, local transit authority documents insisted that any older stations were either converted, sealed, or entirely demolished. No official mention ever confirmed an abandoned station still intact. A handful of older residents disagreed, whispering about a certain Brimwood Station once bustling in the 1950s but shuttered during expansions. Some said it was due to a major structural flaw. Others blamed rumored tragedies. But no living commuter had stepped onto its platform in half a century. To Thomas, it was just another blip in the city's labyrinthine past. Then, while sifting through the municipal archives one rainy afternoon, he found a curious footnote in a 1961 safety review referencing the locked gates at Brimwood Station. Not to be disturbed. The words jolted his interest. If the station was truly sealed, why mention not to be disturbed? Did officials fear something inside? He half laughed at the notion. Yet a spark of curiosity took hold. Later, rumors found him. Bus drivers, old conductors, certain night guards, some insisted a station none were allowed to speak of, still flickered to life occasionally. On certain stormy nights, so they said, an unscheduled train rumbled through dark tunnels, its doors opening for silent passengers. And if anyone from this world dared board, they'd vanish. Or so the stories claimed. Thomas doubted it. He recognized the hallmark of an urban legend, just enough detail to feel plausible. No official record to back it up. Still, he liked the imagery of a ghostly train. In a city as big as Graymont, anything might lurk beneath old foundations. Jokingly, he told a friend he might investigate. The friend paled, warning him that the last people who pried too deeply into the ghost station never found conclusive proof but ended up paranoid or unsettled. At first, Thomas paid it no mind. But that refrain, ghost station, kept drifting into his dreams. Perhaps there was no actual train, no phantom conductor. Perhaps it was the city's way of telling a cautionary tale about prying eyes. He didn't realize how soon the legends would collide with reality. For on a looming stormy night, the city's old rails might host a train not bound by ordinary timetables, carrying an eerie cargo of half-forgotten souls. And Thomas, driven by curiosity, would find himself at the threshold of that clandestine platform, unsure if he'd ever return once he stepped inside. The day Thomas discovered the archival note about Brimwood Station, he felt a minor thrill. He'd always enjoyed uncovering small historical mysteries. He spent a few days searching for references in local library microfilms, old newspapers, city bulletins, even faded engineering blueprints. He found only scattered mentions, a minor reference to Brimwood's closure in 1956 due to line realignment, a short article about an alleged accident that preceded the closure. No details about casualties or the exact cause. Then the station vanished from official records, presumably sealed off from the main network. He pressed a retired conductor, Mr. Warren, who sipped tea on his porch near the rail yards. Warren shrugged, claiming many lines and stations got rerouted or condemned over the decades. But Brimwood, he recalled, was shut in a hurry, rumored to be the site of a freak collision or a structural collapse. Some whispered of a bizarre meltdown involving an entire late-night train that never returned to the surface. Thomas found it melodramatic, an entire train lost? Hardly feasible. Warren admitted the rumors might be spiced up by older conductors, though he hinted there were consistent claims of echoes from that line at night. Thomas's friend, Lily, teased him for chasing subway ghosts. but she also helped rummage online for mention of ghost trains. They found forum posts from the last decade describing how, on certain rain-lashed nights, a few people glimpsed an unmarked subway train pulling into a deserted tunnel access. One post insisted that the train's windows were lit by a pale glow, revealing half-formed silhouettes of riders with vacant expressions. Another user insisted the station was in the southwestern part of the city, near a disused portion of track, but had no proof. Comments mocked them, calling it a well-known hoax. Yet each story ended similarly: if you see that train approach at Brimwood Station, do not board, some passengers never come back. At best, Thomas concluded it was an elaborate rumor. Still, he admitted the theme was fascinating: a station closed in the 1950s, possibly haunted by an old tragedy. He filed it away as a footnote for a future blog post, never suspecting that reality might overshadow any tall tale. But every so often, passing near an older subway stop, he felt an odd hush, as though the city's deeper tunnels whispered secrets he was not yet ready to hear. Time passed, and the story of Brimwood Station stayed in the back of Thomas's mind until an unexpected conversation with a station janitor named Felton, who worked the night shifts. Over a casual coffee in the break room, Felton confided that on stormy evenings, he heard an extra set of tracks humming beneath the main system, as if a train rumbled on a line that was supposedly blocked off. He once tried following the sound, stepping into an older maintenance corridor. The lights there flickered, and he felt a surge of cold air, smelling damp, stale rot. Then the humming faded, replaced by normal silence. Disturbed, Felton never repeated that pursuit. He told Thomas it was best to let sleeping secrets lie. Thomas pried for more specifics, but Felton only shrugged. He'd heard rumors from older staff about a ghost platform that, on rare nights, lit up as if waiting for a train. People insisted it existed deep behind locked gates labeled no access. The official stance was that corridor led nowhere safe, but more superstitious workers refused to pass near it after midnight. The next day, Felton gave Thomas a slip of paper with a cryptic note describing an older sublevel near the southwestern tunnels. If you're determined, maybe you can see for yourself. But I'd advise you not to go alone, or better yet, not at all. Thomas's adrenaline spiked. This was the first tangible lead he'd gotten. The next few nights, Thomas found himself on edge whenever storms threatened. He felt an odd intuition that if the rumored station truly reactivated, it might be near a major downpour. The city's older subterranean systems were prone to flooding, or so he'd read. The last major meltdown in the transit system decades ago might correspond to the abrupt closure of Brimwood. He suspected something in that watery gloom allowed this spectral train to reappear. His rational mind balked, but the archivist in him wanted answers. A swirl of eagerness and dread brewed in his gut, waiting for a storm big enough to push him into the hidden tunnels. Sure enough, the local forecast predicted a fierce storm the following Friday. Heavy rain, potential flooding, strong winds. Thomas read that warnings were posted for the southwestern part of the city. This matched Felton's note about the southwestern lines near the rumored Brimwood corridor. A restless energy overcame him. If the ghost station legends held any truth, that might be the night it surfaced in some ephemeral form. Thomas resolved to stake out the area, ignoring a gnawing sense that it was insane. He prepared carefully: a flashlight, a phone with decent camera capability, a portable charger, and a small personal charm, an old coin from his father that he convinced himself might bring luck. He also considered telling Lily or Felton about his plan, but worried they'd either talk him out of it or, worse, try to accompany him into danger. When Friday arrived, the rain started mid-afternoon, soon escalating to a downpour by early evening. Thomas donned a waterproof jacket, hopped on a near-deserted train to the southwestern end of the line, ironically thinking he was ironically riding the normal subway to possibly find a ghostly version. He disembarked at the last official station, noticing the place nearly empty, with only a sleepy security guard behind the turnstiles. Thunder rumbled overhead. Flickering fluorescent lights made the station's corners look especially grim. According to Felton's directions, an older maintenance corridor lay behind an unmarked door near the station's far end. The guard, half lost in his phone, didn't seem to notice Thomas slip around a partition and down a side ramp. He found a rusted metal door with a faded label that might have once read Brimwood Access. It was locked with a chain. The chain, however, was merely looped, not sealed with a padlock. Thomas inhaled sharply, nerves thrilling. He unhooked it, opened the door, stepping into stale air. This corridor was dimly lit by minimal emergency bulbs overhead, water dripping from some unseen leak. The hush here was unnerving, as if he'd left the real station behind. Thomas ventured down a narrow passage, the floor grimy with old footprints or smudges. A faint tang of mildew and rust pervaded. The corridor's lights gave off a sickly glow, flickering as thunder boomed overhead. He forced calm, pressing forward. After about 50 feet, he reached a wider space, a defunct tunnel branching off from the main lines, presumably sealed. Rusted signage reading Brimwood hung askew, half unreadable. His heart pounded. The station was real, physically present behind these locked corridors. Water trickled along the walls, forming shallow puddles. The air was cooler, echoing each footstep. He flicked on his flashlight, scanning for anything signifying a working track. The rails themselves lay corroded, partially submerged in places. No sign of modern operation. If a train truly reappeared, it had to be beyond normal logic. Yet the hush felt heavier, as if static pressed at his ears. He advanced, following faint indications of a platform. After some twisting passage, he entered a broad, gloom-shrouded space. His beam revealed chip tiles, a sign reading Brimwood Station, established 1950. The platform extended into darkness on both sides, the far end vanishing behind columns. A jolt of excitement and fear seized him. He'd found the rumored station. He half expected only quiet ruin, but the hush told him more might unfold. He set up his phone, intending to record. The station was deserted, water dripping in steady plinks. He paced the platform edge, noticing a large archway that might once have been the station entrance from above ground. The rest was lifeless. He muttered, "No ghostly trains here." Then thunder shook the tunnels, and the overhead lights flickered. For a brief moment, the darkness seemed absolute. Then the lights came back weaker. He realized midnight was nearing. If the stories were correct, the phantom line might appear in conjunction with the heaviest rainfall or the stroke of midnight. He found an old bench near the platform edge and sat at a leg shaky, waiting. The hush pressed on him like a weight. Deep in the distance, water gurgled, possibly a drain. Suddenly, lightning flashed from some crack overhead, thunder vibrating the walls. The hush grew deeper. Thomas's phone read 11:57 p.m. Fear warred with adrenaline. He pressed record, pointing the camera at the tracks. "If anything emerges," he whispered, "I'll get it on film." He didn't realize how quickly events would escalate when the clock struck midnight. At exactly midnight, the hush became suffocating. Thomas's flashlight flickered. Phone camera likewise stuttered. Then, from far down the black tunnel, he heard a faint mechanical rumble, impossible if these rails were defunct. His chest tightened. He aimed his camera. The rumble grew louder, accompanied by a peculiar scraping of old metal. Flickers of light appeared in the distant darkness, as if from an approaching train's headlamps. Thomas's mind reeled. How could a train run on these corroded rails? The roar intensified. Then, out of the blackness, a subway train glided into the station, unbelievably pristine in spots, battered in others. Its windows glowed with an eerie, pale luminescence. The hush pulsated, making it feel like his ears were stuffed with cotton. He trembled, barely believing his eyes. The train screeched to a halt, doors aligning with the platform. Each carriage looked half lost in time, rust creeping on edges. 1950s decor inside. Fog swirled around the wheels. Thomas panned his camera. The phone read 12:01 a.m. Rain battered above ground, presumably flooding some old channel that allowed this train to break through. He stepped closer, heart pounding. The train's doors slid open with a hiss. No conductor was visible. Instead, from inside, faint shapes sat or stood, passengers. Their outlines flickered. Some dressed in vintage suits or dresses. Some in more modern attire, but looking vacant. A portion of them turned their heads toward Thomas as if acknowledging him. He stifled a cry. Could they be ghosts? The hush soared, overshadowing any normal station noise. One passenger, a middle-aged man in a fedora, rose from a seat near the door, gesturing for Thomas to board with a slow wave. Another passenger pressed her palm to the window, face expressionless, eyes milky. Thomas felt a surge of primal terror. The rumored ghost train was here, beckoning him. If he stepped aboard, would he vanish forever? The hush hammered him, and he recalled all the warnings. He forcibly stepped back, hugging the wall. The passenger in the fedora stepped to the threshold, silently inviting him in, but never crossing onto the platform. Something about the caretaker's spirit, maybe it required the passenger to board willingly. As seconds passed, the hush thickened. The lights overhead flickered in protest. He realized the train wouldn't linger. If he stayed, maybe it would depart peacefully. But curiosity nearly overcame him. This was the ultimate discovery. Should he board just to peek inside? Then reason overcame the compulsion. He read from the older accounts, those who ride the train do not return. No, he had to remain. The hush tested him, an intangible pull at his arms. He nearly cried out, just as he convinced himself not to step on the train. He sensed movement behind him. A figure emerged from the gloom, Felton, the janitor who gave him directions. Panting, he must have followed or tracked Thomas's footsteps. Felton's eyes bulged at the sight of the glowing train. It's real, he choked out. We have to leave. But even as he said it, Felton seemed transfixed. The hush latched onto him. The man in the fedora inside the train beckoned Felton specifically, perhaps sensing his weakness. Thomas hissed, "Don't board it," but Felton, tears in his eyes, stepped forward. "I need answers." Felton murmured, "My father was a conductor rumored to vanish. Maybe he's in there." He advanced toward the open door, ignoring Thomas's pleas. The hush grew frenzied, swirling around Felton as if giving him passage. In one fluid motion, Felton crossed the threshold, stepping onto the carriage. The hush soared to a near-deafening wave. Felton turned, looking at Thomas with a sorrowful expression. Then the doors slid shut behind him. Thomas screamed, yanking on the handle. It was locked. Inside the carriage windows, Felton joined the other silent passengers. The hush drowned out all else, so Thomas couldn't hear if Felton banged on the glass. Then, as if following a timeless schedule, the ghost train lurched forward, picking up speed. The hush parted, revealing the screech of metal on rails, the carriage lights flickering. Thomas stumbled backward, filming as the train vanished down the tunnel into darkness. The hush receded, replaced by the faint echo of water dripping. Felton was gone. Heart hammering, Thomas realized he'd witnessed what so many rumored, a train returning from beyond to collect more souls. Guilt racked him. He did nothing to stop Felton, but the hush had overwhelmed them both. Adrenaline spiked. He sprinted from the station, tears in his eyes. He found the main corridor, rehooped the chain. Above ground, the storm raged, lightning slicing the sky. He collapsed onto a bench in the modern station, trembling with shock and grief. 4 days. Thomas was inconsolable. He told Lily and a few confidants about the ghost train. They listened, stunned. Lily pressed him for evidence. He stammered that he had video on his phone. Indeed, the phone's footage depicted a flicker of headlights, a glimpse of a carriage. Though static and distortion plagued most frames, one could see Felton stepping forward, the hush twisting the image. Even so, no official authority believed such a scrambled file. The transit police found no sign of Felton in any normal logs. They concluded Felton left his post, an open missing person case. Thomas insisted the ghost train took him, but they dismissed it as stress. Only Lily believed him, tears welling at the unimaginable truth. Thomas searched for references to anyone escaping the ghost train. He found no success stories, only repeated vanishings. Sometimes a passenger reappeared in a daze, but that was in older rumors, unconfirmed. Lily argued he should disclaim what truly happened to Felton, but Thomas realized it might brand him insane. The caretaker presence behind the train seemed unstoppable. He typed up an anonymous blog post describing the ghost station's reactivation, Felton's disappearance, urging caution to anyone near southwestern lines. Some responded with scorn, others with anxious curiosity. The hush might appear again, and no one in authority was going to intervene without more tangible proof. Weeks passed, the rainy season nearing an end. Thomas half hoped the phenomenon was over until the next major storm. Yet a sense of dread lingered, as if the caretaker might test him. Late one evening, he found a battered subway pass in his mailbox with Felton's name on it. No note, just the hush creeping into his home as he read the name. He understood it as a direct invitation. The caretaker wanted him to attempt a rescue or join the next run. If he refused, Felton might be lost forever. But how could Thomas fight a supernatural train? He recalled older lore, a rare mention of confronting the ghost train with a conductor's relic, using specific incantations to disrupt its ephemeral schedule. But no instructions survived. Another account said if one boarded with an anchor to the living world, they might exit the train forcibly at a certain station. Risk was unimaginable. The caretaker might allow him on, only to keep him as it did Felton. Lily insisted it was madness, but Thomas felt morally compelled. He couldn't let Felton's fate remain sealed without any attempt. So he prepared, collecting items for a final gambit, a strong rope harness, a small iron bell rumored to repel wandering spirits, plus the battered pass. He intended to re-enter Brimwood Station if the train reappeared, board it, find Felton, and somehow jump off with him. The hush might be unstoppable, but he had to try. On a drizzly night, albeit less severe than the previous storms, Thomas returned to the sealed corridor near southwestern lines. He unhooked the chain with a trembling hand. The hush felt immediate this time, as if the caretaker recognized him. He hurried to the Brimwood platform. Flickers of old electric bulbs overhead. The rails gleamed wet, At 12 a.m., the hush soared, and that same mechanical rumble sounded from the black tunnel. The ghost train emerged, headlights glaring pale, its windows tinted with that unearthly glow. Thomas inhaled, gripping the iron bell. As the carriage doors opened, the occupant in the fedora reappeared, the caretaker beckoning silently. Steeling his resolve, Thomas stepped onto the carriage, phone in hand, bag on his shoulder. The hush enveloped him, as if he'd stepped into a different dimension. The interior resembled a 1950s subway car with worn seats, overhead handles, but everything was tinted in a faint, washed-out pallor. Ghostly passengers sat or stood, their faces blank. He scanned anxiously. Yes, Felton stood by the far door, eyes distant, attire slightly damp. Thomas rushed over, ignoring the caretaker's shape drifting behind him. Felton barely recognized him at first. Then his gaze cleared, tears brimming. "I'm trapped," Felton whispered hoarsely. "We can't leave unless at a station that's real. Each stop is full of lost passengers." Thomas squeezed Felton's shoulder, vowing to get them out. He produced the battered pass with Felton's name. Felton blinked, recalling. The hush closed in again as the train jerked forward, heading deeper into the blackness. Thomas realized the caretaker orchestrated these stops in a cyclical route. Only Brimwood might connect them to the living world. He suspected that if they stayed on the train for more than one circuit, they might be lost forever. Summoning nerve, Thomas pressed the iron bell near Felton's chest, reciting a plea. "We claim this passenger back to life. We reject the hush's domain." The caretaker shape hissed, intangible arms swirling at the carriage's edges. The hush hammered them. The train's lights flickered. As the train roared on, it occasionally slowed at half-formed platforms drifting in gloom, each filled with spectral riders. No sign of any living station. Thomas braced Felton, who was trembling from the hush's pressure. The caretaker entity hovered near the carriage doors, morphing through shapes, sometimes a childlike silhouette, sometimes an old conductor with empty eyes. It glared at Thomas for intruding on its domain. He brandished the iron bell, continuing to speak defiant lines. The hush battered him, draining his energy. Felton murmured that each circuit eventually looped back to Brimwood Station. If they timed their exit precisely at that station, they might rejoin reality. But the caretaker often prevented new passengers from leaving, compelling them to remain or vanish. They had to physically force open the doors, ignoring illusions. Thunder rumbled overhead, implying the city's normal lines were still above, but they were far beneath in the caretaker's route. Finally, after a seemingly endless ride, the hush relented a fraction, and the train slowed. Through windows, Thomas glimpsed the faint sign, Brimwood, indeed. The caretaker shape drifted into the aisle, blocking them. Felton's eyes widened in dread. The hush rose to a crescendo. Summoning final strength, Thomas yanked the emergency release lever near the carriage door, something that might override the caretaker's illusions. Sparks flew. The hush shrieked silently, overhead lights surging. The door cracked open a foot. He hammered the door, forcing a gap. The caretaker roared in a swirl of blackness, intangible arms lashing out. Felton cried out in pain, nearly collapsing. Thomas used the iron bell, clanging it once. A wave of energy seemed to repel the caretaker. In that moment, Felton and Thomas squeezed through the parted door onto the Brimwood platform. The hush shrieked, the caretaker lunging after them. But the train's momentum resumed as if forced to continue its route. The caretaker's intangible form receded back into the carriage. Doors sealed, The train glided away into the blackness. For an instant, Thomas glimpsed a carriage full of forlorn souls, each gazing emptily as the train vanished around the curve. Then the hush shattered, replaced by normal station acoustics, dripping water, faint hum of overhead lights. Thomas and Felton collapsed on the platform, gasping. They had done the impossible, left the ghost train behind, returning to real space. Somehow, they found their way back up the maintenance corridor to the modern station. The chain on the rusted metal door was still unhooked. No watchers in sight. Emerging above ground, they discovered the rain had ceased, the city lying quiet. Felton, disoriented, needed medical attention but was physically intact. He had only vague memories of the caretaker's illusions, an endless loop of spectral stops. Thomas felt relief so profound. Tears welled in his eyes. They parted ways, each changed by the encounter. In subsequent days, rumors flared about odd disruptions in the Southwestern line, but no official recognized a ghost train. Thomas told Lily the entire tale. She believed him, seeing Felton alive as proof. He wrote a personal account in his private journal, not the city archives, recognizing some truths were too dangerous for public eyes. The caretaker might remain in the nether tunnels, still active, but with no new passenger to claim. The hush might recede until the next time someone stumbles upon Brimwood Station on a rainy night. As Felton recovered, he admitted to memories of glimpsing others on that ghost train, some from older times, some dressed in modern clothing, each seemingly stuck. He wept for those left behind, uncertain if they could be saved. Thomas consoled him that at least they escaped, proving not everyone is doomed once boarding. But the caretaker's domain likely persists, intangible in the city's hidden arteries. Thomas's final note: the ghost station might reappear whenever storms brew, aligning with some otherworldly schedule. If you see those carriages of pale light in an abandoned tunnel, turn away, for its passengers come from beyond, and the hush that envelopes them spares no one who enters unprepared. Should you ignore all warnings and ride the midnight train at Brimwood Station, you risk stepping into a route not drawn on any city map, and your next stop might never let you off. We survived by grace and luck. The caretaker is still out there, waiting in the gloom, its echoing hush calls to whoever dares pry open the locked gates and descend. Hence, the legend of Brimwood Station endures. In the city's underbelly, locked corridors remain chained, though not always well. On the darkest, storm-tossed nights, some claim to hear screeching rails from an unused track and glimpse windows glowing in a passing train. If they rush to see, they find only empty tunnels, no sign of movement. Others, more unlucky, vanish altogether. For once the caretaker's hush envelopes you, you might find yourself among the silent passengers of the ghost station, traveling deeper into shadows from which only the rarest souls return.